My name is Serafina and I have just turned 28. It's a strange thing to be certain of your age of the years that have passed, when for one long terrifying year, I couldn't even be certain of my own name. I am telling you this story from the quiet solitude of a library overlooking a windswept sea, the very sea that once tried to claim me and, in a way, gave me back to myself. This is the story of how my life was stolen by my own sister, how I was erased. But it's also the story of a man who was promised my name and my fortune, but refused to settle for anything less than my soul. He was a cold, powerful duke, a man who the world saw as unbreakable, but he recognized the fractures in a lie because he had been piecing together the truth of me letter by letter for years. My family thought they had arranged a marriage, a simple transaction of power and prestige. They never could have predicted it would become the ultimate test of identity, love, and a betrayal so deep it almost drowned me. Before I dive into the storm that changed everything, the shipwreck that tore my memory from me and set my sister on a throne that wasn't hers, I'd love to know where you're all watching from. Tell me in the comments below. It helps me feel connected to you all, knowing my story is reaching far and wide. And if you've ever felt like a stranger in your own life or had to fight to be truly seen by someone you care about, go ahead and hit that like button. For those of you who are new here, please subscribe to join our community of storytellers and survivors. It means the world to me. Now let's go back to the beginning, to a life of quiet privilege, where the seeds of my own disappearance were being sown in the shadows of my own home. My childhood was a portrait painted in muted colors. Our family home was vast and opulent, a place where footsteps echoed in long sun-drenched hallways and the scent of beeswax and old money was a constant presence. But for all its grandeur, it was an emotionally barren landscape. My parents were architects of alliances, not nurturers of children. Their affection was a currency, dispensed for achievements that brought prestige to the family name. I was the elder daughter, the dutiful one, the quiet observer. My solace was found not in grand balls or social maneuvering, but in the hushed world of books. I lived more vividly in the pages of novels and philosophical texts than I did in our own drawing room. My greatest adventures were arguments with long-dead thinkers. My most passionate love affairs were with the words of poets. Then there was Isolde, my younger sister. Where I was quiet, she was brilliant, a dazzling flame that drew all the light and warmth in the room. She was beautiful, charming, and possessed a social grace that I profoundly lacked. Our parents adored her. Her laughter was the only music that seemed to truly fill the empty spaces of our home. While I was praised for my intellect in a detached, formal way, as one might praise a well-bred horse, Isolde was cherished for her spirit. I never truly resented her for it. How could you resent the sun for shining? But a subtle poison had begun to seep into our relationship over the years. It was the poison of comparison. In our parents' eyes, I was the stable, reliable asset, the one who would make a good match. Isolde was the treasure, the one they couldn't bear to part with. Her jealousy when it first appeared was a thing I couldn't comprehend. It was like a beautiful bird complaining it couldn't swim as well as a fish. One afternoon when I was perhaps 17, I had won a prestigious literary prize for a series of essays. My father had clapped me on the shoulder, a rare display of physical acknowledgement, and said, "Well done, Serafina. This will look excellent on your marriage prospectus." Later that day I found Isolde in the garden, tearing the petals from a prize-winning rose, her expression a mask of cold fury. "It's not fair," she had whispered, her voice tight. "You always get the serious praise, the things that matter. All I get is, 'Oh, Isolde, you look so lovely tonight. I'm just an ornament.'" I had tried to comfort her, telling her she was so much more than that, but she had recoiled from my touch. "You wouldn't understand," she hissed. "You have a mind. I just have a face." It was the first time I realized that she didn't see my world of books and thoughts as a refuge, but as a fortress she couldn't enter, and she resented me for it. The fortress, as it turned out, was exactly what secured my future. When I was 20, our family's fortunes became entangled with those of Duke Alistair Beaumont. The Duke was a legend, a man who had inherited a title and crumbling estates at a young age and had, through sheer force of will and a notoriously sharp mind, rebuilt his family's power into something formidable. He was spoken of in hushed, intimidated tones. Cold, ruthless, intensely private. He lived in a remote, imposing castle on the northern coast, and by all accounts he preferred the company of ledgers to people. He needed a strategic alliance to secure his political standing, and my family needed his influence. And so a match was made. I, Serafina, was to be his duchess. The news was delivered to me by my father in his study, the same way he might announce a new business acquisition. There was no consideration for my feelings, my desires. It was a transaction. I was to be traded for power. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. I was to be married to a man of ice and stone, to live in a castle at the edge of the world. Isolde's reaction was peculiar. There was a flash of something in her eyes. Envy, yes, but also a strange, calculating pity. A duke, she said, her voice a little too bright. Well, sister, you've certainly landed the biggest fish in the sea. I hope he doesn't bore you to death with talk of shipping routes. It was the duke himself who proposed the most unusual part of our arrangement. A week after the engagement was announced, a letter arrived, bearing his formidable wax seal. The paper was heavy, the handwriting a sharp, intelligent script. He wrote that since circumstances prevented us from a traditional courtship, he proposed we engage in a correspondence. A marriage is a partnership of minds as much as it is a joining of houses, he wrote. I would know the mind of the woman I am to marry. I was stunned. It was the last thing I expected from the cold-hearted recluse of popular rumor. Tentatively I agreed. And so began the most profound relationship of my life, conducted entirely through ink and paper. My first letter was stiff and formal, a reflection of my own fear. His reply was surprisingly gentle. He asked me not about my dowry or my family connections, but about the last book that had made me weep. The question was so unexpected, so deeply personal, that it cracked the shell of my reserve. I wrote back honestly about a collection of poems that spoke of loss and resilience. He responded with a searingly intelligent critique of the poet's work, but also with a confession that he, too, had felt a profound connection to a particular verse. Over the next 2 years, our letters became my entire world. We built an entire universe between us, a secret garden where our souls could meet. I learned that the cold Duke Alastair had a scathing wit, a deep appreciation for the arts, and a hidden vulnerability that he showed to no one else. He wrote of the immense burden of his responsibilities, the loneliness of his power. He confessed that he often felt more like a custodian of a legacy than a living man. Sometimes, he wrote in one letter that I read until the paper grew soft, I feel as though the stone of this castle has seeped into my bones. I fear I am becoming as cold and gray as the walls that surround me. I, in turn, open my heart to him in a way I never had with another living soul. I wrote of my feeling of being an outsider in my own family, of my fear that my life was a script written by others. I shared my dreams, my half-formed poems, my philosophical questions about the nature of a meaningful life. He never condescended or dismissed my thoughts. He engaged with them, challenged them, built upon them. He saw me, the real me, the one hidden behind the quiet, dutiful facade. I sent him a pressed wildflower from our gardens, a tiny, resilient bloom that grew between the cracks of the flagstones. This reminds me of you, I wrote. Something beautiful and strong growing in a hard place. He wrote back that he had placed it on his desk, and that it was the first piece of unstructured beauty the room had seen in a century. I was falling deeply, irrevocably in love with a man I had never met. The person on the page was my intellectual equal, my confidant, my soulmate. The impending marriage was no longer a sentence, but a promise of a life I had never dared to dream of. Isolde watched this transformation with a curdled curiosity. She would see me scribbling away at my desk, a smile on my face, and she would scoff. Still writing to your phantom lover? She'd tease. Don't be so disappointed when you meet him and find out he's just a boring man who happens to own a lot of land. Her words were laced with a bitterness I couldn't quite place. It was as if my happiness was a personal affront to her. Finally, the time came for me to travel to his estate for the wedding. My parents decided Isolde would accompany me, to serve as my lady-in-waiting and companion until the ceremony. The day we were to depart, she came into my room as I was packing my precious box of his letters. She picked one up, her expression unreadable. You really believe all this, don't you? She asked, her voice soft. You believe this man of stone and ice has a poet's heart just for you? I don't believe it, Isolde, I replied, carefully taking the letter from her. I know it. She gave a small, sad shake of her head. You're so naive, Sarah. You always have been. You get everything. The title, the fortune, the duke. What's left for me? Her words were an echo of that day in the garden years ago, but now they held a darker, more desperate edge. I felt a pang of guilt, a feeling my family had always been so good at instilling in me. "Your time will come," I said, trying to reassure her. "You'll find your own happiness." "Yes," she said, her eyes glinting strangely. "I suppose I will." The voyage was fraught with tension. The sea was choppy, the sky a bruised purple even during the day. Isolde was quiet, withdrawn, spending most of her time staring out at the turbulent water. I tried to draw her out, to share my excitement and my nervousness, but she was a locked room. On the third night the storm hit. It was a thing of mythic fury. The sky and the sea became one churning, violent entity. The ship was tossed about like a child's toy, the sound of splitting wood and screaming wind a terrifying symphony. We were thrown from our bunks. The cabin flooded with icy water. A sailor burst in, shouting for us to get on deck. We fought our way through the chaos, clinging to ropes and railings as the ship tilted at an impossible angle. On deck, it was a nightmare of crashing waves and splintering masts. I saw a lifeboat being lowered and screamed for Isolde to follow me. As I scrambled towards it, a colossal wave crashed over the side, sweeping me off my feet. My head connected with a piece of falling rigging with a sickening crack. The world exploded into a starburst of white-hot pain. My last conscious memory was of being in the churning, black water, my strength failing. I looked up at the deck of the dying ship. And I saw her. Isolde. She was standing by the railing, clinging to it, her face illuminated by a flash of lightning. Our eyes met. I saw no fear in her expression. No panic. Just a cold, terrifying stillness. A calculation. She watched me. She watched me drown. And she did not call for help. She did not reach out. She simply watched as if she were observing an interesting and final experiment. Then the darkness took me. I woke to the gentle sound of lapping waves and the warmth of a fire on my face. My head throbbed with a dull, persistent agony. I was lying on a simple cot in a small rustic room that smelled of dried herbs and salt. A man with kind, tired eyes and silver-streaked hair was leaning over me, dabbing my forehead with a cool cloth. "Easy now," he said, his voice calm and deep. "You've had quite an ordeal. You washed ashore this morning." I tried to speak, to ask where I was, who he was, but the words wouldn't form. I tried to reach into my mind for a name, for a memory, for anything to anchor myself to, and I found nothing. A complete and utter void. It was a terrifying, hollow emptiness, as if my entire past had been scooped out, leaving only a raw, bewildered present. I looked at the kind man, my eyes wide with a terror I couldn't name. Who am I?" The question came out as a ragged whisper. The man's expression softened with pity. "I don't know, my dear," he said gently. "I found no identification. We'll figure it out. For now you are safe. My name is Caspian Hale. I am the local doctor." Seeing the desolation in my eyes, he added, "We have to call you something. Since the sea brought you to us, shall we call you Marina?" I nodded, clinging to the name as a drowning woman clings to a piece of driftwood. Marina. It was all I had. Meanwhile, miles up the coast, a different story was being told. A lone survivor from the shipwreck, a grieving, beautiful young woman, was brought to the gates of Beaumont Castle. She was wrapped in furs, her face pale and tear-streaked. She introduced herself to the stoic household staff. "I am Lady Seraphina," she announced, her voice trembling with practiced sorrow. "My ship, there was a storm. My sister, my dear sister, was lost to the waves." Isolde played her part to perfection. She wept, she collapsed into the arms of the concerned housekeepers, she told a harrowing tale of survival and tragic loss. When she was finally brought before Duke Alastair Beaumont, she looked up at him with wide, devastated eyes. He was taller than she had imagined, his presence more imposing. His face was all sharp angles and intelligent gray eyes that seemed to see right through her. For a moment she felt a flicker of fear, but she quickly smothered it. She was Seraphina now. He had to be. "My Lord Duke," she breathed, sinking into a curtsy. "Forgive my appearance. We have been through a terrible ordeal." Alastair looked down at her, his expression unreadable, a mask of cold formality. He had been waiting for this moment for 2 years, the moment he would finally meet the woman whose mind had captivated him. He had pictured her 100 times, imagined the sound of her voice. He had expected to feel a jolt of recognition, a click of connection. Instead he felt nothing. A strange and profound emptiness. This woman was beautiful, yes. Poised even in her supposed grief. But there was something missing. A light. A depth. "You have my condolences on the loss of your sister," he said, his voice a cool, level baritone. "The castle is at your disposal. Rest. We will speak later." He turned and walked away without another word, leaving Isolde standing in the vast, cold entrance hall, a sudden chill seeping into her bones that had nothing to do with the sea. The first crack in her new life had already appeared. The months that followed unfolded into a quiet, gentle routine in the small coastal village of Oakhaven. Life with Dr. Caspian was simple and healing. His small cottage was filled with books, medical charts, and the constant comforting scent of brewing tea. He was patient and kind, never pushing me for memories that wouldn't come. He treated me like a daughter, teaching me about local herbs, showing me how to stitch a wound, and encouraging me to read from his extensive library. My past was a blank slate, but my core self began to re-emerge, like ghost writing appearing over a flame. I discovered I had a love for language, devouring every book Caspian owned, from medical texts to poetry. I found a strange comfort in the weight of a book, the smell of ink and old paper. Without knowing why, it felt like coming home. One day, Caspian found me scribbling in a small leather-bound journal he had given me. I was writing not memories but observations. The way the light hit the waves at dawn, the stoic resilience in the face of a fisherman's wife, my own fragmented, confusing dreams. "You have a writer's soul, Marina," he said, smiling gently. A strange pang went through me, a flicker of something familiar, but it was gone before I could grasp it. I helped him in his clinic, tending to the sick and injured of the village. I discovered a deep well of empathy within myself, a satisfaction in easing the pain of others. The villagers came to accept me as Marina, the doctor's quiet, mysterious ward. They were kind, simple people, and their acceptance was a soothing balm on my fractured mind. Yet, a profound melancholy haunted my quiet moments. I would stare out at the sea for hours, feeling a terrible sense of loss for a life I couldn't recall. I had phantom pains in my heart for people whose faces I couldn't see, for a name that felt like it was on the tip of my tongue but would never be spoken. I was a ghost haunting a life that wasn't my own, and I didn't even know whose life I was supposed to be living. Far away in the cold grandeur of Beaumont Castle, Isolde was living the life she had stolen. She walked the ramparts as the lady of the castle, dressed in the finest silks and jewels. She commanded the staff, hosted local dignitaries, and played the role of the future duchess with practiced ease. On the surface, she had everything she had ever wanted: wealth, status, and the attention of the most powerful man in the region. But the reality of her new existence was a gilded cage, and the jailer was the Duke himself. Alistair Beaumont was nothing like the man from the letters. He was a creature of ice and silence. He was polite, impeccably so, but there was a vast, unbridgeable distance between them. Their dinners were agonizingly quiet affairs in the cavernous dining hall. She would try to fill the silence with gossip from her past life, stories of balls and flirtations, the trivialities that had once been her entire world. He would listen with a detached stillness, his gray eyes revealing nothing, before offering a curt, dismissive reply. He was an observer, a hawk watching a sparrow, and she felt constantly, unervingly scrutinized. Her greatest fear was the subject of the letters. She knew they had been important, the foundation of this arranged marriage, but Serafina, in her quiet way, had been intensely private about their contents. Isolde had only gleaned fragments. She tried to bluff her way through. One evening, as they sat in his study, a room that felt more like a fortress lined wall to wall with books, he gestured to a small pressed wildflower preserved under a glass dome on his desk. "I was always touched that you sent this to me," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Tell me again what you said it reminded you of." Isolde's mind raced. A flower? Serafina had sent him a flower? What sentimental nonsense. She tried to guess what her sister might have written. "I believe I said it reminded me of the fleeting beauty of summer, my lord," she said, trying to sound poetic. "A reminder to cherish the moments we have." Alistair's expression didn't change, but a subtle, cold light entered his eyes. He said nothing more on the matter, simply changing the subject to the management of the estate's finances, a topic on which she had absolutely nothing to contribute. He knew she was lying. The real Serafina had written that the flower, a resilient bloom growing between stones, reminded him of her. Of something beautiful and strong growing in a hard place. This woman's answer was generic, hollow. It was the answer of a stranger. We were given glimpses into Alistair's private torment. Alone in his study late at night, the facade of the cold Duke would crumble. He would unlock the carved wooden box where he kept every letter Serafina had ever sent him. He would run his fingers over her elegant, thoughtful script, rereading the words that had become the architecture of his heart. He would read her passionate arguments about philosophy, her witty observations, her confessions of fear and hope. He would hold the pages and breathe in the faint scent of the ink she used, a scent that was more real to him than the expensive perfume the woman sleeping down the hall wore. This is not her, he would think, the words a bitter refrain in his mind. The woman in his castle was a hollow vessel. She was ambitious, he could see that. She was clever in a superficial social way. But she was not the woman who had challenged his worldview, who had understood his loneliness, who had sent him a simple, perfect wildflower. He felt a grief so profound it was a physical ache in his chest. The soul he had fallen in love with, the brilliant, vibrant mind that had reached out to him from across the country, had been extinguished in the cold, dark sea. This woman wearing her name was an impostor, not by design but by a cruel twist of fate. A pale imitation who only served to remind him of what he had truly lost. He began to treat Isolde with an even deeper, more impenetrable coldness. It was not cruelty for its own sake. It was a shield. A shield to protect the memory of the real Serafina, and to guard his own shattered heart. Back in Oakhaven, my own soul was beginning to stir. Nearly a year had passed since I had washed ashore. My physical wounds had long since healed, but the amnesia remained a stubborn fog. One crisp autumn afternoon, a traveling merchant set up his wares in the village square. He had goods from all over the country. Fine fabrics, exotic spices, and a small, beautiful collection of writing supplies. I was drawn to a particular set of stationery, a heavy, cream-colored paper, and a small bottle of deep blue ink. The moment I picked up the bottle and uncapped it, the scent hit me. It was rich and earthy with a faint metallic tang. And my world shattered. It wasn't a memory, not at first. It was a feeling. A powerful, overwhelming surge of emotion. My hand began to tremble. I saw a flash in my mind's eye. My own hand holding a quill, the ink staining my fingertips, writing a name. A man's name. Alistair. The name was a thunderclap in the silent chamber of my mind. It felt like an anchor, a destination, a piece of my own heart that had been missing. I swayed on my feet, the world tilting. I saw more flashes. A wax seal with a beast's crest. The weight of a heavy book in my lap. And then a chilling, terrifying image. A face, a beautiful face so much like my own, framed by the chaos of a storm, watching me with cold, calculating eyes. Isolde. My sister. I stumbled back from the merchant's stall, gasping for air. Marina. What is it? Caspian was at my side in an instant, his face etched with concern. My name. I whispered, my voice shaking uncontrollably. My name is not Marina. The dam had broken. It wasn't a gentle stream of recollection. It was a flood. A torrent of memories, chaotic and painful, crashed down upon me. The letters. The arranged marriage. The hopeful journey. The violent storm. And the final, ultimate betrayal. Isolde watching me die. My sister had not only left me for dead, she had stolen my name, my future, my entire life. The grief and the rage were so immense I thought they would tear me apart. I collapsed into Caspian's arms, sobbing not just for my lost memory, but for the profound, unthinkable cruelty of my own blood. It took me 3 days to process the horror of it all. I told Caspian everything, the words pouring out of me in a desperate, ragged torrent. He listened patiently, his kind face a mask of sorrow and righteous anger on my behalf. What are you going to do? He asked, his voice gentle. A new feeling was rising through the grief and the shock. Determination. A cold, hard resolve that solidified in my very bones. I had been passive my whole life, the quiet observer. I had allowed my parents to dictate my future, my sister to overshadow me. No more. This was my life. This was my name. And the man she was deceiving was not just some duke. He was the man who knew my soul. I have to go to him, I said, my voice low but steady. I have to go to Beaumont Castle and tell him the truth. Caspian looked at me, his eyes filled with a father's worry. Serafina, he said, using my true name for the first time, the sound of it both strange and deeply right. It will be dangerous. Your sister will not give up her position easily. The Duke, he may not believe you. You will be a penniless stranger against the word of his betrothed. He will believe me, I said, a certainty settling over me that defied logic. He may not recognize my face, but he will recognize me. I know he will. Seeing the unshakable resolve in my eyes, Caspian nodded slowly. He did not try to dissuade me further. He knew this was a journey I had to make. He gave me what little money he had saved, packed a small bag of food and a warm cloak for me, and walked me to the road that led north. Be careful, my dear girl, he said, his voice thick with emotion as he embraced me. You came back from the sea. You can survive this too. As I walked away, turning to wave one last time at the only true parent I had ever known, I felt a tremor of fear, but it was overshadowed by a burning, righteous fire. I was no longer the lost girl, Marina. I was Serafina. And I was coming to reclaim my life. The journey north was arduous and draining. I traveled for weeks, sometimes on merchant carts, mostly on foot, sleeping in barns and cheap inns. The simple clothes Caspian had given me grew worn, and my face became thin and weathered from the road. I must have looked like any other vagrant, a far cry from the pampered lady I had once been. But with every step that brought me closer to Beaumont Castle, the fire inside me grew hotter. I rehearsed what I would say, what proof I could offer. But in my heart I knew the only proof that mattered was the truth of who I was, a truth I shared with Alistair. Finally, one windswept afternoon I saw it. Beaumont Castle. It was not a fairy tale palace but a fortress, a jagged crown of grey stone that rose from the cliffs, defiant against the crashing sea. It was imposing, formidable, and somehow beautiful. It looked like him. My heart hammered against my ribs as I approached the massive gates. 2 guards, clad in the Duke's livery, stepped forward, blocking my path with their pikes. Their expressions were bored and dismissive. "State your business," one of them grunted, looking me up and down with disdain. "I am here to see the Duke," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My name is Serafina, and I am his betrothed." The guards exchanged a look of amusement. The first one laughed, a short, harsh sound. "Lady Serafina is already here, you madwoman. She's been here for a year. Now be off with you before we have you thrown in the dungeons for impersonating nobility." "Please," I begged, my desperation mounting. "You don't understand. She is the imposter. I am the real Serafina. Just let me speak to him. He will know me." "That's what they all say," the second guard sneered. "Now move along." He shoved me backward and I stumbled, falling to the muddy ground. Humiliation and frustration burned in my throat. They would never let me in. I was just a madwoman at the gates. I retreated, my mind racing. I couldn't give up. There had to be another way. I spent the next 2 days watching the castle, learning the routines. I saw carriages come and go, deliveries being made. I realized my only chance was to cause a scene so public they couldn't simply throw me out. I learned that a formal reception for local landowners was being held that evening. It was my only chance. That evening, as richly dressed guests began to arrive in their carriages, I slipped through the gates in the confusion, my simple worn dress a stark contrast to their finery. I kept to the shadows, my heart pounding, and managed to find my way into the castle itself. I found them in the great hall. The room was ablaze with candlelight, filled with music and the low hum of conversation. And there at the center of it all stood Alistair and Isolde. My sister was a vision in emerald silk, jewels dripping from her neck and ears. She was laughing, her hand resting possessively on the Duke's arm. Alistair stood beside her, a portrait of cold, handsome indifference. He looked regal and remote, but I could see the tightness around his eyes, the weary tension in his posture. He looked like a man trapped in his own home. My breath caught in my throat. I took a step forward out of the shadows. "Isolde," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the din like a shard of glass. The music faltered. Heads turned. A pocket of silence formed around us. Isolde's head whipped around, her smile freezing on her face. When she saw me, all the color drained from her cheeks. It was a look of pure, unadulterated terror, quickly followed by a flash of incandescent rage. "You," she breathed, her voice a venomous whisper. Alistair turned, his gaze falling upon me. He saw a disheveled, thin woman with wild eyes and a desperate expression. There was no recognition in his face. Just a weary sort of curiosity. "Who is this woman?" Isolde shrieked, recovering herself. Her voice was high and sharp, drawing the attention of everyone in the hall. "A beggar who has wandered in from the streets? Guards! Remove her at once." 2 guards started towards me, but I stood my ground, my eyes locked on Alistair. I ignored my sister completely, as if she were nothing more than a piece of furniture. I spoke directly to him, my voice ringing with a desperate clarity. "My Lord Duke, you do not know my face. The sea and a year of hardship have changed it. But you know my mind. You know my soul. And the woman standing beside you is a liar and a thief." A gasp went through the crowd. Isolde looked as if she wanted to murder me with her bare hands. "She's insane. A lunatic spouting nonsense to try and get money. I have never seen her before in my life." Alistair raised a hand and the guards halted. He looked from Isolde's furious, panicked face to my own desperate, earnest one. He was silent for a long moment, his gray eyes searching my face, looking for something. I could see the conflict, the cautious hope warring with years of disappointment. "Prove it," he said, his voice low and dangerous. This was my moment. This was the test. "Ask me anything," I said, my voice gaining strength. "Anything from our letters. Ask the woman beside you what I wrote on the eve of the summer solstice, when I confessed my greatest fear to you. Ask her what philosopher I called a pompous fraud in my 7th letter. Ask her about the pressed wildflower I sent you, and what I said it represented." Isolde paled even further. These were details she could never know. "This is absurd. I will not be interrogated by a filthy madwoman," she spat, tugging on Alistair's arm. "My love, have her thrown out." Alistair didn't even look at her. His entire being was focused on me. A muscle feathered in his jaw. He asked the question, the one that had haunted him, the one Isolde had answered so poorly in his study. "You wrote that you feared one thing more than death," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper, but it carried across the silent hall. "What was it?" I met his gaze, and in that moment the entire world fell away. There was only him and me, a conversation that had been interrupted for a year finally resuming. I took a breath, and I gave him back his own words, words he had written to me in a moment of vulnerability, which I had then echoed back to him as my own deepest fear. "I wrote," I said, my voice clear and unwavering, "that I feared a life unlived, a soul that never found its counterpart, a silence where there should have been a conversation." It was as if I had spoken a magic word. The ice in Alistair's eyes didn't just melt, it shattered. It was replaced by a tidal wave of emotion so powerful it was breathtaking to behold. Recognition, relief, wonder, and a towering, formidable rage. This was it. This was her. The turn of phrase, the specific sentiment, the soul he had been mourning for a year, standing before him in the guise of a beggar. He finally truly saw me. He turned slowly to face Isolde. The mask was gone. His face was a thundercloud of cold, precise fury. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The question he asked was a quiet execution. "Who," he said, his voice like the chipping of ice, "are you?" It was all over. Isolde's carefully constructed world crumbled into dust. Her face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. "She's lying. It's her. She's trying to ruin me," she screamed, her shrill voice echoing in the stunned hall. She lunged towards me, her hands like claws, but the guards were on her in an instant, restraining her as she thrashed and shrieked accusations and curses. Her elegant facade had been ripped away, revealing the desperate, grasping jealousy beneath. The truth was laid bare for everyone to see. Alistair didn't spare her another glance. He ordered the guards to take her away, his voice ringing with an authority that no one dared question. Then he turned back to me. He took a step forward and then another until he was standing right in front of me. The crowd, the hall, the entire world seemed to fade into a blur. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before he gently brushed a strand of tangled hair from my face. His eyes, no longer cold, were filled with a year's worth of grief, suspicion, and a hope he hadn't dared to acknowledge. "You," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that stunned me. It was raw and real. "I knew you weren't gone. I felt it. In that moment, I knew that just as I had fallen in love with the man on the page, he had fallen in love with the woman in the letters. And that woman had, against all odds, come home. Alistair dismissed the shocked guests with a curt, authoritative gesture that left no room for argument. The great hall emptied in a flurry of whispers and scandalized looks, leaving us in a sudden, profound silence. He gently took my arm, his touch both a question and an affirmation, and led me away from the scene of my life's reclamation. He didn't take me to a formal sitting room or a guest chamber. He led me through winding corridors to his private study. The moment we stepped inside, I felt an overwhelming sense of déjà vu. It was exactly as I had pictured it. A sanctuary of knowledge and quiet contemplation, lined from floor to ceiling with books. A massive oak desk stood before a large window overlooking the stormy sea, and on its polished surface I saw it. A small glass dome, and beneath it a single faded wildflower. My wildflower. My heart ached with a feeling so intense it was almost painful. This was the room where he had read my words. This was the place our minds had met. "Please sit," he said, his voice softer now, the ironclad duke replaced by the man from the letters. He guided me to a worn leather armchair near the fireplace and then knelt before me. He took my hands in his. They were rough and calloused from my journey, a stark contrast to his own strong, well-kept hands. He examined a cut on my knuckle with a look of intense concentration, as if it were a matter of state importance. "I am sorry," he said, his voice low. "I am so sorry for what you have endured. While you were suffering, I was dining with your shadow." "You couldn't have known," I whispered. "I did know," he corrected, looking up at me, his gray eyes searching my face. "Not the truth, not the specifics of the deception. But I knew she wasn't you. From the first day. There was no light in her, no depth. Her mind was a shallow pool compared to the ocean of yours. I thought. I grieved for you. I believed the woman I had come to care for more than I can express had perished at sea. Her presence in this castle was a constant, painful reminder of that loss. My coldness towards her. It was not just suspicion. It was a monument to your memory." His confession undid me. Tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed began to stream down my face. They were tears of relief, of vindication, of a bone-deep exhaustion finally giving way. He didn't try to comfort me with platitudes. He simply held my hands, a silent, steady anchor in the storm of my emotions, until the weeping subsided. He told me of his year of quiet torment, of rereading my letters, of feeling like he was being haunted by a ghost he had fallen in love with, and I told him everything. About waking with no memory, about Caspian's kindness, about the slow, painful journey back to myself. We talked for hours, bridging the gap between the people on the page and the people in the room, finding that the connection was not only real but deeper and more tangible than either of us had imagined. The question of Isolde's fate hung in the air. The next morning, Alistair informed me that she was confined to a suite of rooms in a separate wing of the castle. She was being treated with courtesy, but she was a prisoner. By law, for treason against a noble house, I could have her executed, he said, his voice hard. "What is your wish?" The thought of Isolde's death, despite everything she had done, sent a cold shiver through me. She was my sister. Her jealousy and ambition had twisted her into a monster, but she was still the little girl who had once held my hand. I thought of the desperation I had seen in her eyes years ago, the feeling of being an ornament. It didn't excuse her actions, but it explained them. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I don't want her death on my conscience. But she cannot be allowed to hurt anyone else." We decided on a different path. There was a remote, secluded convent on an island to the north, a place known for its austerity and isolation. It was a place for reflection, not a dungeon for punishment. Isolde would live out her days there, with time and silence to confront the choices she had made. It was a merciful sentence, but a firm one. A life sentence of a different kind. I asked to see her one last time. Alistair advised against it, but I needed to close that chapter of my life myself. I found her in her room, pacing like a caged animal. The fine silk dress had been replaced with a simple gray woolen one. When she saw me, her face hardened into a mask of resentment. There was no remorse. "Have you come to gloat?" she sneered. "No, Isolde," I said quietly. "I came to ask why." She let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Why? You dare to ask me why? You who had everything. The name, the mind, the praise that mattered. And then you were given this. A title, a castle, a duke. What was I given? A future as your spinster companion living in your shadow. The storm, it was a gift. It gave me a chance to be you, to have the life that should have been mine. It was never yours, Isolde, I said, my voice filled with a sadness that surprised me. You could wear my clothes and use my name, but you could never be me. Because you don't know who you are. You only know who you wish you were. Her face crumpled, the anger giving way to a raw, ugly despair. I hate you, she whispered. I've always hated you. Those were the last words my sister ever said to me. As I walked away, I felt not triumph, but a profound aching pity for the empty space where her soul should have been. In the weeks that followed, Alistair and I truly began our courtship. We walked the wind-swept battlements of the castle. He would point out constellations in the clear night sky, and I would read to him from my journals, the thoughts of Marina blending with the soul of Serafina. We discovered that the intellectual intimacy of our letters translated into a deep, comfortable companionship in person. He wasn't the cold Duke of Rumor, but a man of profound integrity and a surprising dry wit. And he, in turn, saw in me not just the writer of the letters, but a woman of strength and resilience he had not expected. He loved that I had survived. He cherished the strength that my ordeal had forged in me. The love that had been born in black and white ink began to blossom in vibrant, breathtaking color. Our wedding was not the grand, political affair our parents had planned. It was a small, intimate ceremony held in the castle's ancient chapel. My only family in attendance was Dr. Caspian, who had traveled for weeks to be there. Alistair had sent for him, insisting that the man who saved my life should be the one to give me away. As Caspian walked me down the aisle, his face beaming with pride, I knew I had finally found my true family. It wasn't one of blood and obligation, but one of choice, kindness, and unwavering support. When I stood before Alistair and he took my hands in his, he leaned in and whispered so only I could hear, "Oh, Serafina. It is a true honor to finally meet you." And in his warm, steady gaze I finally truly came home. Life as the Duchess of Beaumont was more fulfilling than I could have ever imagined. I did not forget the lessons I had learned as Marina, the amnesiac who had found a home among simple, hard-working people. With Alistair's full support, I used my new position not for lavish parties or social climbing, but to enact real change. We established new clinics in the villages, using the knowledge I had gained at Caspian's side. We opened the castle's vast library to the public, creating a center for learning and education for those who had never had access to books. I was no longer just the quiet girl hiding in the pages of a novel. I was a woman who could put the wisdom from those pages into practice, to make the world a little brighter. Alistair was not just my husband, he was my partner in every sense of the word. We would spend our evenings in his study, the room where our love story had begun, poring over maps and ledgers, debating policy and planning for the future of our people. He valued my opinion as much as any of his advisors, often more so. He loved my mind, the very thing my family had seen merely as a feature on a marriage prospectus. With him I was not an asset or an ornament. I was his equal. The cold, remote Duke had opened his heart and in doing so had become a beloved and respected leader with me by his side. The stone of the castle had not seeped into his bones. Our shared love had warmed it from the inside out. Years passed. The story of the impostor sister and the true Duchess became a local legend, a tale whispered by firesides. We had children, a son with his father's steady gaze and a daughter with my love for words. I made sure they grew up knowing that their value was not in their title or their wealth, but in their character and the kindness they showed to others. I taught them that family is not always defined by blood, but by love, respect, and loyalty. Our home was not a place of echoing silence and emotional transactions, but one filled with laughter, debate, and unwavering affection. Sometimes, when the wind howls in from the sea, I walk along the ramparts and look out at the churning gray water that once stole my past. I no longer see it as an enemy. In a strange, profound way, that storm was a gift. It stripped me of my name, my memory, and my identity, forcing me to build a new one from scratch. It took away the dutiful, timid daughter and replaced her with a resilient, compassionate woman. It took me from a family that saw me as a pawn and delivered me to a man who saw me as a queen. I lost everything, but in that vast, terrifying emptiness, I found my true self. I found a love that was not arranged by families, but was written in the stars, and on sheets of paper that traveled hundreds of miles to knit two lonely souls together. My name is Serafina Beaumont, and I am a survivor. I am a wife, a mother, and a duchess. And I know with every fiber of my being that true love doesn't recognize a face in a crowd. It recognizes a soul across a lifetime. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey today. It's a story I hold very close to my heart, and sharing it with all of you means more than I can say. I'm curious, have you ever had a moment in your life where you felt completely lost, only to find a stronger version of yourself on the other side? Share your story in the comments below. I truly love reading them and seeing the strength in this community. Don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you, and please subscribe for more stories of resilience and the incredible power of the human heart. Remember, your identity is not what others label you as, but what you prove yourself to be through your actions and your love. Thank you for listening.